I really had a time period where the fear that I could become like my mother, God rest her soul, was so palpable to me that it felt really urgently dangerous because I think my brain could not wrap around how it was she became the way she was. I could not make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of her choices. I couldn't make sense of how her life spun out from where it began. Like, it was just a nonsensical sort of path. And so I think I had a very real fear in my brain of that could happen to you because why did it happen to your mom? And I remember at that time going to therapy and really unpacking it because I was truly living in this fear that I knew logically didn't make sense, but it felt very real to me. And that's what the book is very much about, is memory, trauma, all these things that if we take a logic look at, we're like, well, of course I realize that I'm out of danger now, but the body does not realize that. And that's what the work is. And that's what was so hard for me, to not feel that sense of actual terror, that I would just wake up one day and I would be in her shoes.
This week, I got to talk with Chelsea Bieker, who is the author of multiple books, but we are talking about Madwoman, which just came out today. This is going to be one of those books that I just talk about forever and ever and ever, and I know it's going to be on the top of my 2024 favorites. So I was very excited for this interview. I had 174 highlights after I finished this book, so I was seriously worried that I would try to talk to her for hours. But we kept it to an hour somehow. But this is what it's about. The world is not made for mothers, yet mothers made the world. Clove has gone to extremes to keep her past a secret. Thanks to her lies, she's landed the life of her dreams, complete with a safe husband and 2 adoring children who will never know the terror that was routine in her own childhood. If her buried anxiety threatens to breach the surface, Clove, if that's really her name, focuses on finding the right supplement and the right gratitude meditation. But when she receives a letter from a women's prison in California, her past comes screeching into the present, entangling her in a dangerous game with memory and the people she thought she had outrun. As we race between her precarious present-day life in Portland, Oregon, and her childhood in a Waikiki high-rise with her mother and father, Clove is forced to finally unravel the defining day of her life. How did she survive that day, and what will it take to end the cycle of violence? Will the truth undo her, or could it ultimately save her? A gripping story of motherhood and mother loss, intimate terrorism and terrifying love, the insidious ways male violence disrupts mothers and daughters, and the brutal, mighty things women do to keep themselves and each other alive. Madwoman marks Chelsea Bieker as a major fiction talent. I agree with everything there at the end. This book is so emotionally poignant and very, very psychological suspense, emotional suspense. You feel everything that Clove is feeling. And as you can imagine from what you've heard of her childhood, anxiety is pretty pervasive in her life. So you just feel all of it as she tries to figure out how she's going to keep the life that she's carefully created for herself. So I loved getting to talk to Chelsea about this one. We dive into all of the complexities of motherhood, the cycles of domestic abuse, and also the long-lasting effects of PTSD from your childhood. So, with that being said, let's hear from Chelsea. Before we dive into Madwoman, I did want to get to know a little bit about you. So, what was the moment that you were like, I want to be an author? Or what was the moment when you were like, I think I'm going to write a book?
Yeah. I think, like so many authors, I was just so in love with books as a child. They provided such a safe space, and I loved the way it felt to get lost in a story. So I think that's pretty universal for most writers. And then
Yeah.
in high school, I just loved to read. I knew that I just wanted to always be reading, and I did like writing. I think I had in my mind that I wanted to write books, but it wasn't really until one of my English teachers sort of noticed that about me, and she asked me to come write for the school paper. So that was a big turning
Nice.
point because prior to that, I didn't have a ton of direction, and that allowed me to feel really like I was sort of part of this thing that was bigger than me, and I was seeing my name, like my byline and things that I'd written, people were reading. And that exchange, I think at an early age, really shaped that desire to want to put work into the world and have that back and forth. So I kind of pursued
Yeah.
journalism actually first, and but was always writing fiction. I always
Yeah.
knew that I really wanted to be writing fiction, but I will say what journalism really did for me was it really honed my curiosity because I was interviewing so many people and I was able to pursue the stories that I was interested in. And it also taught me to really write on a deadline. So I could turn
Mm,
around copy really quickly. And I think that helped my fiction writing in the end because I'm not so precious about where I write, when I write, how I write. I just know that I can do it whenever. So I'm grateful for that
yeah.
sort of beginning.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, you're already used to it having to be kind of regimented and like finished on time. That's cool. It's a cool way that that kind of translated into everything. With your fiction, how do you approach that writing process? So, do you typically know, like, do you outline? Do you just pants it? Like, how do you get into your writing process?
I love the term pantsing. Are you a plotter or a pantser? Um,
Yeah.
I think that I go in on a feeling. I
Mm,
don't do a lot of planning. I don't do a lot of outlining, but definitely around the middle of the process, an outline becomes really important, especially for a
mm,
book that has quite an active plot, I would say. I love books with wild plots and twists and turns. And when you start to figure out what the story is really about, it's helpful then to have that sort of framework really dialed in for yourself.
mm.
So with Madwoman, once I felt pretty confident in the story, and this is like a year and a half into writing it or more,
Yeah.
I realized, I could get more of a bird's eye view of it and really be more strategic about when certain things were happening and the sort of rhythm of the plot. I use this sort of like three-act structure where I just wrote out three columns and literally wrote like every scene, every beat that was happening, and so I could track when certain things were happening. And that was really
Mm,
useful, but that was really only something I could use after I had written more from that like intuitive heart space first, because that's where the real
yeah.
story lives to me and that's where the discovery is. However, like I'm writing a new book right now and I think I know kind of what it's about, but I know in the writing process I will ultimately be surprised. um, and
Yeah.
that's the best part. So I can plan a little bit, but I know that I hold that really loosely.
Yeah. You kind of have to feel it first. Especially with this one, because I would almost call it like emotional suspense the whole time.
Mm.
I could see how you're coming from the feeling first. With your characters, do you kind of get to know them in that first process where you're just kind of like feeling out what the story is?
Yeah, I feel like once I hook into a voice, I start to understand more about them. Once I can hear the way
Hmm.
they talk and the way they're thinking, it really informs how they're going to see everything, what they're going to do. So it's really based in that more sonic knowing of how a person sounds and how they talk. And I think that that's always been the way that I've written, where I just will hear a voice or a line come to me,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's like a strange way to say something or a strange way to see something. And I'll be like, okay, that informs me of how they're going to see this other thing and this other thing. And,
Mm,
and it's really fun, actually. It's sort of that moment where, the narrator of Madwoman, especially, is very similar to me. Um, a lot of the conditions of her life are very similar to mine, and it's probably
yeah.
the most close to the bone character I've ever written. However,
Wow.
as I got deeper in there, I was able to see the ways we are different, and some of that is
Mhm.
rooted in the way she talks and thinks, and that branches off and becomes its own thing. Um,
Yeah.
so even if a
Yeah.
character is sort of based on someone or rooted in my reality, it always shifts and becomes its own thing because of the voice, I think.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, it sounds like some of the inspiration then might have been from your own experiences. But what was your initial inspiration for Madwoman?
Well, the very, very, very first little seed um, came long before I ever wrote it. And it was my daughter, she's 10 now, and she was 2 at the time. So it was quite a while ago. But I, when I stopped breastfeeding her, I had what's called like post weaning anxiety and depression disorder set in. And I was totally gobsmacked. I had no idea that could even happen to you. Um, but it really kind of sent me on this path, this sort of healing journey, if you will, to
Mm.
figure out like what is going on? Why do I feel so insane? And it and no one's really, I mean, there's very little studies around this, of course, like many women's issues. And
Hmm.
it really required me to piece things together myself and see a lot of specialists and all these healers, and I think in that process I had this moment where I went out one night. I hadn't been away from my daughter at all, like since she was
Mm.
born. That was kind of part of my like postpartum anxiety, is that I just never wanted to leave her. But I went
Yep.
to a reading, and when I was there was this younger woman there who was so much fun, and we really hit it off. And as we were talking and hanging out that night, I couldn't help but think of the ways that I had changed since becoming a mother. Like it really felt so stark to me in contrast to this younger woman before me, where I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I see myself in her. I'm reflected in her, but also I am so different than I was. And that was so startling. And it made me really start to think about the ways that motherhood had changed my identity. And also I think it was sort of the seed of the character of Jane in the book.
Mm.
This person that comes into her life that she really wants to be be a bit of a mentor to, or like warn her a little bit about about
Yes.
what motherhood is like, what aging feels like, all those things. And I think that that little seed was really born that night. I came home and I wrote a really fast little short story called Madwoman, and then I just
Nice.
put it away. But I always went back to it. I really loved the energy that it felt very urgent. And so,
Yeah.
in 2020, when the pandemic happened and my book tour was canceled for my first novel, I just decided to write this book. I was like,
Yeah.
now I have time to sit and kind of stew about what this voice is trying to say. And it turned into something much more than I bargained for. So,
Yeah. That's powerful that it came from that. And keeping with that, the first like I think it's four sentences are so powerful. Like I'm always so impressed when it feels like the whole of the novel is almost included in those first few sentences. But it starts off with the world is not made for mothers, yet mothers made the world. The world is not made for children, yet children are the future. So what like drew you to writing about how vital mothers are, but how we also kind of look down on them and definitely don't accommodate for them in our society? And also that like children are so important because they are the future, but some people really don't take it seriously, like what it means to like raise a kid.
mm. Yeah, I think that when I became a mother, I was sort of not prepared for the ways the world was not made for me and my kids. Like
Yeah.
in very practical ways. There's a scene in the book where she's at the post office, and um, I feel like you don't even have to be a mother to relate to this feeling, but any mother will relate to this feeling where
Mhm.
you kind of enter a space and you feel total dread because you can see all the ways it's not going to work for a small child to be in that space, yet you have to mail the package. Like you have to do the thing.
Right.
And the post office became this like metaphor in a way for me because I was like, here I am in this very public space that should be for everyone. And it's set up in such a way for me to totally fail because they had this, they literally, I have a picture of it. This Lego, it was this rendering of a post office made of Legos. It was at child height behind a glass case, but it wasn't locked. So I mean, the sliding glass door alone, kids are going to want to play with. It's just, it's sort of, but then the total judgment and disdain that befell
Mhm.
me when my really small son was like wanting to play with these Legos, a literal child's toy, but he couldn't. But it was just such a mess. And it was right in the line. So I was like, I have to stand in this line for 20 minutes with this
Right.
Lego set, but he can't touch it, but the glass door is at his eye level. It was crazy, and by the time I got to the checkout counter, I was crying. Like, it
Yeah.
sounds so dramatic, but I was at this
No.
point of desperation where I was like, I would love to just get back in my car and leave, but I don't know when I'll ever, like, I was the primary caretaker. It's not like I was gonna get another day that I'd be alone where I could do this errand. And I sort of felt defiant too, where I was like, no, I'm staying in this space and I'm gonna mail this damn package. But it was just
Yes.
this portrait of a much bigger issue, right? It's not just the post office. It's all these spaces that don't accommodate mothers. And I felt very like pushed to the side of society in a way where it's like, well,
Mhm.
you can just go to the park, lady. You just go
Right.
where you belong to your mommy group in the park. And it was an odd sensation where it's like on one hand, I was really enjoying being a mom and I loved my kids so much. There was so much about it I loved, but there was also this like sensation that I wasn't really part of society anymore, which sounds
Oh,
really
man.
crazy.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, right? Like, yeah, we're on the surface so like people really want to act like, investing in children is that's so important, that's the future, but
Mhm.
they're not investing in children. Our country
Right.
doesn't invest in children and mothers, and that
No.
is the problem. I think if you paid mothers, if you provided resources, if you invested in schools and the arts, all those things that we know, our society would be so much better for it. But it's sort of this weird, I don't know, not to get into all the politics too, but it's just this weird missing piece where none of it really adds up. And I wanted to kind of show that frustration in the book, how it plays out on a day to day level, at that really micro
Yes.
level. Um,
Yep.
yeah. So
Yeah, it was reminding me that scene, one of my friends was reading the book at the same time as me. And so I was like talking to her about it and I was like that opening scene, I was like it really like it's not, but it feels like horror. Like it is the like horrors of motherhood. Like I was like I don't have kids, but the Clove is she's crying, I think she's been headbutted, right? So she's like bleeding too. She's crying, she's bleeding, and her boobs are leaking. And I'm just like, as someone who like, if I'm sweaty in public, I'm like starting to be overstimulated. I was like, this is like, it's such, I really appreciate authors who kind of like show the really unflinching realness of what motherhood is. And it was such a way to start the story.
thank you. Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
it's funny, the first lines of the book, the ones that you read, I was nervous with starting the book with those because
Mm.
I am conscious. I was like, is this sexy enough? Is this like cool
Oh.
enough? Will this immediately, people will put it down because they're like, I don't want to read about moms and kids. And that's, I had to just stand strong in that and be like, no, this is important. This
Yeah.
is a provocative way to start the story, actually. And
Yeah.
but I felt that sense. I
Yeah.
I probably looked for some other lines thinking like, is there another way in? But for this book,
Yeah.
there's really not. It's really foundational, and the book is not just about that, but it's about
Mm-mm.
but it touches everything. And actually, it's
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend tell me when I was kind of debating this, she was like, everyone has been mothered. Everyone has been cared for. It is
Mm-hmm.
universal that if you were born, someone was in charge of you. Like,
Yeah.
we all know what it's like to love a mother, yearn for a mother, be mothered. Whether or not we are mothers or will ever be mothers, we all
Mm-hmm.
know what that is. And so, in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, it does apply to everyone, I believe. So,
Yeah, it really does. Um, so Clove is she's obsessed with doing motherhood and doing her whole life differently than how her mom did it. Like it's a big preoccupation for her. And she's like ruminating on it a lot too. So how did you approach writing like kind of her inner monologue and how she's kind of like trapped with the fact that she doesn't trapped in her obsession of being who or not being something instead of like knowing what she does want to be.
mm, I love how you put that. Like, she's preoccupied with not being a
Yeah.
certain thing. Uh,
It was a big part of my own therapy, so I
yeah,
felt it.
I
Yeah.
know. I know that you said that that was a really connective point for you. And
Yeah.
I think it was like, for me, I really had a time period where the fear that I could become like my mother, God rest her soul, you know, was so palpable to me that it felt really urgently dangerous because I think
Yes.
my brain could not wrap around how it was she became the way she was. Um,
Yes.
I could not make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of her choices. I couldn't make sense of how her life spun out from where it began. Like, it was just
Mhm.
a nonsensical sort of path. And so I think I had a very like real fear in my brain of like that could happen to you because why did it happen to your mom? I mean, like
Mhm.
I could, because I couldn't make sense of it. I started feeling like it could happen to me at any moment. And I remember at that time, like going to therapy and really unpacking it because I was truly living in this fear that I knew logically didn't make sense, but it felt very real to me. And that's what the book is very much
Yes.
about, is like memory, trauma, all these things that if we take a logic look at, we're like, well, of course I realize that I'm out of danger now. Um,
Mhm.
but the body does not realize that. And that's where the
Yes.
work is. And that's what was so hard for me. Um,
Mhm.
to not feel that sense of actual terror that I would just
Right.
wake up one day and I would be in her shoes. And
Yeah.
I'm out of that, and so I can look
Mhm.
back at it and be like, "Wow, that was really intense." Like, that was a true
Yes.
fear. And also, yeah, and it ties in with the way that this narrator is terrified of memory. I mean, how do you make memory scary? How
Yeah.
it's just memory, right? But I wanted to, that was the challenge of writing the book, where I was like, I want to really show how PTSD works. And
Mhm.
PTSD does not care about logic. It's in the
No.
room, it's urgent, and it's telling you something is very wrong, even if you're
Yes.
just in a rocking chair with your infant. Like, and that I
Yep.
had to learn that for myself, and I was like, I have to try to write this somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other kind of element of like the really intense emotional suspense is she's afraid of becoming the enabler and kind of like the doormat that her mom was. But she also is afraid, like when she's angry and has some of those, like what we typically call negative feelings, but aren't always negative feelings. Then she's scared of being her abusive father as well. So, what I, and that just sticks out to me. Like I really understand like when the genetics that were given to you are from people who you never want your life to look like, it's it can be so overwhelming. So how did you kind of like incorporate that? And was that kind of always part of the goal, like with some of the emotional suspense?
Absolutely. I mean, the title Madwoman is a play on many different meanings. And at its
Hmm.
core, to me, it's about not only like the label of Madwoman given to women who are quote unquote crazy, um, and wanting to flip that on its head and be like, no, for me, this is about anger. This is
Yes.
about, I'm mad. I'm mad in the
Hmm.
sense that I'm angry. Um, and so it has all these meanings, but I wanted to show a narrator who is feeling not only like fear about becoming her mom, but actually recognizing within her that she holds so much anger.
Yeah.
And that does mirror back her father, who he's a very angry person, and a violent
Hmm.
person, and someone who goes into what she calls the red out zone, where the anger goes almost into this total blackout zone and he becomes
Hmm.
violent. And she feels, what's interesting is she actually, I think, is more similar to her father than her mother
Yes.
in her personality, in her disposition, even her physicality. She kind of looks in the mirror and she sees him looking back at her. And
Hmm.
that's sort of haunting because she has to grapple with those impulses in herself that
Yep.
I think there's a line in the book where she's like, the only difference between me and my father is that I can take that breath, that I can take that deep breath.
Yes.
And it's also an exercise, right, in like some level of compassion for him too. It's not black and
Hmm.
white. He's not just this villain. He's someone that
Hmm.
she's forced to kind of see the complexity of him as well. And that was also important to me. I don't love a story where someone is just a villain. It's like
Yeah.
just a bad guy. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but generally in life that it's more complicated than that. And
Yeah.
and it definitely is for her father, and she has to entertain the
Hmm.
ways that, yeah, they are similar despite
Yes.
despite
Yes.
her.
Yeah. I loved that sentence you referenced where it is like the big difference is that she's able to take a breath. Because that's sometimes what happens for me, especially like when I'm PMSing. And so
Oh yeah.
my thoughts are so ragey.
Mhm.
And sometimes you're like, oh my God, like I'm going to start being an explosive person.
Yeah.
But like I have to remind myself, like there is a difference if I keep it in my head and don't blow it up on other people.
Yeah,
So I do like that sentence for that.
that's the whole difference. And women expressing anger, right? It's like we don't have a real format for that. Like as
Yeah.
soon as you express anger, you fall into that crazy, the
Mhm.
crazy territory, the mad woman, like, and you're not taken seriously anymore. It's very hard to
Mhm.
figure out, how do we express anger in a healthy way? And
Mhm.
I I think that we must express it. Like we have to let it
Yeah.
out somehow. And
Yeah.
because otherwise, it just turns back on us. It just turns into that disease in the body. And
Yes.
she's contending with that because, like under every sadness or under every anger,
Yeah.
sadness is just behind. It's like they're always connected. They're always together. So
That was one of my other highlights. It was like, "But aren't there always tears behind anger?" And I
yeah.
was like, "Oh,
Oh
yeah."
yeah. I know.
There
I
are.
know. But yeah, I love that you said PMSing. I'm like the luteal. I think also in the book
Yes.
she's like, I allow myself one throat shredding scream into a pillow during my luteal
Yes.
phase. Because sometimes I think that phase for women almost offers this little window where we express
Mhm.
our true feelings, right? It like shines a light on
Yeah.
what is real within us, but we finally have this like hormonal permission to let it out. Um,
Right.
so I've been
Yeah.
trying really hard to be like, okay, the feelings and thoughts that come up during that phase of my cycle are not irrational. They're actually true. They just
Mhm.
are able to rise all the way up and
Yeah.
I can really look at them. So
Yeah.
that was
That's a really good
that was a
point.
reframe for me. I was like, yeah, this isn't actually irrational. I've just lost my ability to tamp it down.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. It's just like elevated basically.
yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that happens with Clove is she gets to a point where she doesn't want her relationships, basically as an adult moving forward, to just be founded in pity. And so that's kind of what makes her decide to just kind of make a whole new life for herself. And everyone she meets moving forward, like she's telling a different story than what was real. Um, so how did you kind of like approach creating those moments where like pity felt overwhelming?
Mm. Yeah, I think that that was really a huge theme of the book. I think a lot about how so much of my writing is this idea of writing into what I call personal fantasy. Um,
Mm,
so, like on the page, I can have interactions, conversations, confrontations. I could watch a scenario play out that I can't access in my real life, right? There
mm,
can be like a improbable save at the last minute. There can be a run in that's serendipitous that would never normally really happen. Or,
mhm,
there can be a way to explore things like pity in this really palpable way, which I felt was important for the book. And that idea of personal fantasy includes not carrying one's story around. I've
mhm.
felt at various times in my life that my story or what I've experienced in my childhood felt like sort of a ball and chain that I'm just like carry. It's a heavy
Yes.
backpack, and sometimes I'm like, can I just set this down? Like, I actually don't want to contend with it at all. Like, could I just pretend to be
Yes.
someone else? And
Hmm.
I mean, in real life, no, I can't really do that, or
Right.
I never did. But I was like, what if this
Yeah.
character really goes to an extreme to do that? Is there
Hmm.
something so wrong with that? Is she owed a fresh start in that extreme way? And of course, the book is about the fact that that doesn't necessarily work. Like our
Yeah.
those memories, our past lives within us in a much deeper way. So eventually they have to be
Yeah.
confronted. But
Yes.
she really wants to see if maybe she could sidestep that. So you
Yeah.
know, it was fun
Yeah.
to
It
write.
really does.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does remind me like of she is trying to dissociate from it completely as much as she can. And then I think kind of what you're talking about, without giving anything away, I thought it was cool that some of her arc is about reintegration and like owning all the parts of yourself and all of that. But I felt that before where I'm like, I don't want my trauma to be the only thing people know or
Yeah.
remember about me.
And
And so,
it does change
yeah.
the feeling in the room a little bit. Like I
Hmm.
think
Yeah.
especially in some of my early like dating experiences or romantic
Mm-hmm.
relationships, I could just feel that it was outsized or something. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something about my partner. I mean, we've been together for a very long time. Um,
Hmm.
and there's no chance I could have hidden anything really, but
Right.
I really sensed that he was not seeing me necessarily
Hmm.
with that like filter. I for
Yeah.
whatever reason, but
Yep.
other partners in the past, I could tell that it was always sort of in the room in a way that
Hmm.
sometimes would feel nice because you're being seen,
Yes.
and then but also I think I just have this like independent streak that didn't love that
Hmm.
feeling. And I was
Yes.
like, no, I want to be
Yeah.
more in charge with how I'm being seen, I
Yes.
guess.
Yep. I feel you there on that a lot. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Bookwild. And if you are, could I ask you a favor? Could you go and rate and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening? Ratings and reviews make the biggest difference in discoverability of the podcast, and I definitely want to find all of our fellow thriller readers out there. So if you could go rate the podcast and leave a short review, that would make a huge difference. Thank you, and let's get back to the show. Clove also, she's kind of, we talked about it, she gets a little bit obsessed with the idea of also becoming a mother, almost to kind of like prove that she could do it better
Hmm.
or the right way than her mother did. And so she has these kids, but then also kind of starts to realize, like, there's a sentence about how eventually they just become mirrors that are reflecting stuff back to her. And even though she's like done all this research and stuff, it's not perfect. So how did you kind of approach that part of the storyline that's like wanting motherhood so bad and then also realizing how difficult it is even if you're not in an abusive situation?
Yeah, it's I just remember, from my earliest thoughts in childhood thinking I really want to experience family. I want a normal family. I was so taken by these normal families. I'm doing quote marks, but these
Yeah.
families that seem to like really exist in this very basic way that just seems so
Yeah.
easy and nice. And I was like, one day I want that. I know I want that. And if I can get that, then somehow it will, I don't know, absolve me.
Right.
And in some ways it does. It's like Clove is very educated on, healing modalities and wellness and all these things, and she is really convinced that if she can have this, experiential healing,
Hmm.
by sort of like rewriting the past by having this present opposite experience, that she will be sort of relieved of the pain of her experiences that she had in
Hmm.
childhood. And in some ways, right, that is true. Like it can
Hmm.
be extremely healing to have a very
Hmm.
opposite experience, and that's really beautiful. And then also, right, there is the sense that it works in both directions, because when she sees her kids, she's feeling the strains of motherhood even in much better circumstances. She has to re-entertain what she knows about her own mother. I think that was the biggest
Hmm.
thing. She becomes a mom and she's like, "Oh shit, this is still kind of hard and my life is way better
Hmm.
than my mom's, and how could I have expected my mom to mother under those conditions?" And that's the big
Right.
like light bulb. I think it's like this novel where she's having to expand compassion and also narrow this anger, because it's both.
Yeah.
She's like angry at
Yes.
her mom, but also she's having to expand in compassion at the same time,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which is just a lot of growing pains.
It is. Yeah. The what you're kind of talking about too is her anger is definitely directed at her father. He's kind of like the most overt abuser in the family, but especially as she gets older as a child and also then later as an adult, she really has a lot of resentment too toward her mother for because it feels like she didn't love her enough to get them out of such a bad situation. And so that's kind of more of the covert abuse that sometimes happens when one parent's just letting the other parent run wild with their abuse. Um, so how did you kind of like approach that as well? I think sometimes people get so focused on like just being angry at the abusive parent.
Yeah.
And then later in life, you realize, but like my quote unquote nice parent didn't care enough to protect me either. And now that I'm an adult, I would have protected my child.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hugely important for me to show sort of those longer effects of domestic violence. And one of them
Hmm.
is Clove reckoning with the feelings she has toward her mother.
Hmm.
And her mother is the victim of this circumstance, but also Clove can't help but feel that her mother really kept them in this place of suffering. And
Hmm.
what I hope it shows too is like the psychology behind prolonged abuse is really significant. Like
Yeah.
your brain is changed from that abuse. And so you're actually not necessarily always able to get out of that cycle.
Yeah.
But for a child, you cannot understand it. From your vantage
Mm.
as the child, it just looks insane. You're like, why don't we leave? You know,
Yes.
why are we going back after that? Or there's no logical sense that a child can make sense of that. And so they
Mhm.
just, she feels angry at her mom. She's like, you're the one driving us
Mhm.
back. You're the one,
Yes.
you know, covering for him. You're the one.
Mhm.
And of course that's like misdirected anger. Um,
Mhm.
but it's anger nonetheless. It's still there.
Mhm.
And she, because there's so, I really feel that, you know, there's so much emphasis on her mom's addiction in the book, you know,
Mhm.
as the dad uses it against her when the police come. Oh, she's an alcoholic, don't listen to her, you know. But no one is thinking about her, the abuse she's enduring in the greater conversation of her sobriety or
Mhm.
recovery or anything. And that's a huge misstep, because you know, the addiction and the abuse are totally holding hands in the book.
Yeah.
And the mom really doesn't have much. I mean, the sad truth is like when you're in that deep, to get out is like
Mhm.
extremely complex. It
Yeah.
requires probably a lot of support that generally
Mhm.
is not all that available. And I think people have this idea like there's resources, just find some
Mhm.
resources. And it's like even when you are have the wherewithal to find resources, they're extremely limited. So,
Yeah.
you know, you need a shelter for the night, there might not be a bed. And you've got a kid,
Yeah.
there's not always help, and we don't realize that. And so I wish that there was always help, but there's just not. And so
Yeah.
it's not, the conversation is so much more complex than like she should have just left, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just
That is.
I wanted the book to show that. I think that a lot of
Mhm.
like more, I don't know. I feel like some portrayals of domestic violence that we see in stories or media or these like really popular narratives don't account for that complexity. They are showing
Yes.
this version that is totally unrealistic to most survivors of domestic violence. And
Right.
I guess
Yeah.
I guess we those become popular because we like that simplicity in some way because it makes sense to us, but
Yeah.
that's just not the reality for most people.
Yeah. Kind of some of that nuance too comes out because one of her mom's friends, well, they become friends with a daughter and a mom as well. One of her mom's friends is like, is basically asking her like, and you're gonna go back to him again, and her mom says, well, yeah, I love him, and the friend Christina says, you don't love him, you love being a victim. And so that is like, also there's a book, if some people have been in therapy, there's a book called Addicted to Misery,
Mhm,
that's like that even that
mhm.
becomes your addiction. So that was what I thought was really fascinating about what you did with her mom, was like there is empathy for her too, kind of all the things you just mentioned, but you're also still like, okay, but you've kind of like decided that you like being the victim and you're just going to kind of stay here, is what eventually happens over time.
Yeah, because it's wild how the brain tells you that that is the safer choice. Ultimately, like
Hmm.
that familiarity to that feeling becomes this like
Yeah.
this reward center in the brain, which is
Yeah.
it is really mind-boggling. And from an outside perspective, it's infuriating, you know, like
Yep.
to watch someone kind of over and over just throw themselves into the fire. And you're like,
Yeah.
what? But I mean, it's very nuanced.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, you know, Clove's mom wants a better life for them, but she
Hmm.
kind of also at the same time can't imagine what that would be. Like, I think she's
Yeah.
really been reduced and diminished to the point that her self-worth is so low that
Hmm.
even if there was a solution right in front of her, I don't know if she could
Yeah.
take it. You know, like that self-worth is so low that she has totally started to believe that this lifestyle is what she deserves. And
Yeah.
that's that like really messed up psychology of
Hmm.
abuse.
Right. Yeah. And then it creates the kind of like, I feel like, again, I'm trying to tiptoe around spoilers, but um it also creates such a confusing situation for Clove,
Mhm.
even because even kind of like you were saying, expanding some compassion, even when she can maybe see her mom or start to understand her as a human and like all of those things, it still doesn't like negate the like things that have hurt Clove and made her like approach life the way that she does too. So it's so complex because you can kind of see it from an outsider's perspective, but then when you're the kid who had to like survive it and it felt like no one cared about you, it's
Yeah.
hard to like move forward with that as an adult.
Well, I think that that was a huge reason that the book is written in a direct address to the mom, because you're
Yeah.
right. I love what you just said. There's a sense that within the stress and confines of living under this like regime of domestic violence, there is not
Hmm.
a lot of room to have true connection, to really know
Yeah.
someone, because you're in survival mode, right? So her
Yes.
mom is only ever looking at her through the lens of like herself. Like how are you going to
Yeah.
save me? Or like
Hmm.
we it's us against your father, but very almost no time is ever devoted to the parents looking at their daughter and being like, "Hey, what do you like?" You know, like they're just not
Yeah.
asking that question. And she's
Yeah.
so aware of that as an adult. She's like, I don't have any memories of like doing normal childhood things because I was
Yes.
always in this weird three-pronged relationship with you two. And it was all about you
Hmm.
two, you know?
Yeah.
Despite all this compassion we can garner at the end, she was totally not parented. And she
Yes.
feels resentful for that. So the book is a little bit like, "Hey, you're gonna look at me. You're gonna look at my daily
Hmm.
life. I want you to know me for who I
Hmm.
really am, and I'm speaking directly to you." And I felt like that was a very I knew the book had to be written in that format.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved it. I felt that part very much through all of it. The other thing I noticed, I think, so there's one guy that she dates early in her life, and we never learn his name. He's just the butcher. And I could be wrong because I realized it halfway through. But I think we also just addressed her husband as my husband. I don't know if we ever learned his name. Was that a creative choice? And I mean, I'm going to ask if you were taking some power away from the men by not giving them names.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, I was, for sure. I think it was really an impulse I just had when I first
Yeah.
started writing it. I just had them named that way, and it kind of stuck. Like I didn't really see a reason for names for them.
Yeah. I get it.
Um, I think it's okay. Yeah, and we don't learn the father's name, his real name.
Yeah.
We know his nickname, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that sometimes a move like that can be distracting at
Mhm.
its worst, right? You're like,
Yeah.
there really should be a reason behind it, and it should be done, I think, like, not like, it might be too distracting if every single character did not have a name. You know, I don't
Right.
wanna do that to confuse the reader. I think it's pretty clear who is who and sort of what
Hmm.
that move means, but it's definitely trying to pull focus off of the men in the book.
Yeah. I liked it because, and I don't think it was distracting because it also did take me until like 50 or 60% where I was like, wait a second. I don't think we even know her husband's name. So obviously, like, I hadn't cared enough to be like, what's his name?
Yeah, and
So it worked for me.
names are interesting in the book too, where like she goes through a couple different names and she
Hmm.
isn't ever true like super settled in that way for herself because
Yeah.
of the scrambling of her identity early on. So there is
Hmm.
this sort of like that's mirrored in some of the women too, where they're also trying to figure out like what is my name? What is my identity
Yeah.
after all of this? And I
Yeah.
think it's sort of this little thread that runs through.
Yeah. It even kind of fits, I'm just realizing this now, what we were talking about at the beginning, where um like anything that can happen postpartum, but you were talking about weaning specifically with anxiety and depression that can come on. It's also like a nod to the fact that like even men's health has been prioritized over women's health for like centuries or however many years. So it's like, let's just care about the women in this book for right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, during the writing of this book, I did a lot of research about that very thing, and it was really shocking to learn that so many medical studies are just they are done on men's bodies, but those results are applied to women. And
Yeah.
men's bodies work very differently than our bodies. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
it it's so infuriating. I mean, I read this book called, I think it's Ordinary Insanity by Sarah Mendendek. I might be messing
Okay.
up that last name. It was like the kind of book, it's such a good work of journalism, but as I read it, I was like, I need to throw something across the room because she
Yeah.
really outlines how deep this goes and how little women's health is prioritized. And it's really horrifying.
Mhm.
I mean, and then you find it out firsthand because you have a problem like post-weaning anxiety, and even the people that are, midwives or lactation consultants, they're kind of like, we don't really know. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
this, you could try this, are you taking enough walks? Are you, you're like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
going to figure this out on my own. And what I really found
Right.
was this total, like, what felt like a whisper network on the internet of mom blogs
Yeah.
talking about it. And that's
Yeah.
where I was getting my information.
Yeah.
My doctor was not gonna have any medical opinion about the matter. And so, there's a funny moment in the book where the doctor's like, "Have you tried some chamomile tea?" And she's like, "I'm beyond chamomile tea right now." Like, and that's how I
No.
felt too. I was like, "What?" Like, of course I've tried
Yeah.
that. Like, I'm doing
Uh-huh.
everything I can, and I'm also like, there's no break in caretaking to address
Mhm.
your health, and it feels like a real clusterfuck, really, and it
Mhm.
is. And I part of wanting to write that into the book was like, I really want to encounter that in fiction. I want it to be a thing because it is a thing.
Yeah.
I just did another
Mhm.
interview, and the woman I was talking to also had gone through the same thing, and I was like, "What are the
Oh,
chances?"
wow.
Like, it's very common, actually, but we're
Yeah.
made to think it's, like, so rare that a single study
Right.
can't even be done on it. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I know many women who have experienced this, so
Yeah. That's what I when you were bringing up the chamomile tea, that's what I've experienced. I have PCOS, and it's a really similar thing where like they're like just go on birth control, and like it helps some of it, and like I definitely am worst when I'm not on it. But then they'll be like, peppermint tea can be really helpful. And I'm like, I don't think peppermint tea is gonna fix this for me. And they're like, like you're saying, they're like, do you exercise? And I'm like, yes, I exercise. Like I wouldn't be here if I
yeah.
hadn't tried some of these things already.
Right. It's like they're just kind of throwing darts at a board. And of course, like you're like, yeah, exercise, vitamin D, iron, fish
Yes.
oil. Like we know,
Magnesium.
yeah,
Yeah.
magnesium. These are like the gold standards. We all kind of know that. Um,
Yes.
but beyond that, like I found also there seemed to be, I think even in some I don't know if you find this to be true. It's like sometimes you also just want a medical professional to acknowledge your suffering.
Right.
I wanted them
Right.
to be like, "Oh, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry." But it
Yes.
was, like, hard to find even that. It was sort of like, "Are you making this up? I think you're just tired."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I've lost the ability to sleep." Like,
Yeah.
that I can't
I
even
am
sleep.
tired.
Like, I'm so
Yeah.
tired that I can't sleep is what's happened. And,
Oh,
um it's something that once I was out of it, I could look
mhm.
back and see actually how hard it really was because
Yeah.
it was so distinct. I was like, it did end,
Yes.
and when it did, I could look back and be like, "Holy shit, I can't believe I lived through that." basically
Right.
like a year of
Oh my
feeling that
gosh.
way, feeling like I have just, it felt like someone just plugged me into like an electrical outlet, and I was just always like,
Right.
zzz. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anyway,
Even back to PMS, that's the same thing for me. Mine would be so bad, and then you start your period, and like you're like, everything feels fine again. And so then like
completely,
I have to
yeah,
be careful that I don't like obsess in my
yeah,
luteal week of like, okay, I still haven't fixed it, and instead kind of be like, you're just not going to fix it during this week.
exactly.
And then you immediately feel better. It is wild when you have those moments and you're like, oh, that's just what
Yeah.
was happening, and like how much harder it is to live when that's going
Well,
on.
if we lived in a matriarchy, we would honor cycles, and we don't.
Yeah,
We honor the 24-hour cycle, which is the cycle that
the
men's
male
bodies.
hormonal
Right.
cycle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And that's the cycle our entire lives are scheduled around. And
Hmm.
I would love to think that there's some change coming for that. I know if you work for Channy Nicholas, her company, she offers like menstrual leave. Like you get some
Oh wow,
days. Yeah. And,
it's nice.
but it's like that is not across the board right now.
No,
But
no.
it should be, because if we played to those cycles, I think that everyone benefits, right?
Yeah,
Um, but
yeah.
that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
conversation right now. It's like what women get to choose with their body.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that would be a long conversation. Well, obviously, I adored this book. I really loved it. I loved how you pulled it together at the end, but I won't say anything about it. So I hope everyone who's listening goes and reads it too. But I have been asking authors at the end if they've read anything recently that they loved. So I don't know if you have any.
Yes, of course. I love it. Came out this year. It was a debut novel. It's called We Were the Universe by Kimberly King Parsons.
Mm-hmm.
It is another look at motherhood. It's about grief, it's
Mm-hmm.
about desire. I've never seen a book that entertains desire and horniness in the realm of the day-to-day caretaking of a child. And
Wow.
often I think those things are always separated, or when you become a mom, you're
Mm-hmm.
like, you're exempt from the being horny or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Or
Or like what is it's like the Madonna or the
yeah, the
mother,
honor
like
the
you can only
whore.
be one or two. Yeah, or the whore, yeah.
Yeah, and that book is so funny. It's so funny, and it's about sisterhood, it's about loss, and how do we process loss when we are in that really daily intimate relationship as you're caretaking. Um,
Yeah.
so good, so voicey, so masterful
Yeah.
on every level. So that one, and then a book that just came out today, actually, another
Ooh.
debut novel called The Volcano Daughters by Gina Maria
Ooh.
Balibrera. Um,
Okay.
it is so good. It's very different, but also, it's about women. It's kind of witchy. It's
Ooh.
really voicey. It's really inventive. I think like
Okay.
the first paragraph, you're just like blown away. You're like, oh, we're really in for something kind of different here. So
Yeah.
it's a great cover too. So I'm really excited
Yeah.
this year about those two. And
Mm.
this is a
They
good
sound
year for
good.
books. I always say that every year. I'm like, oh, there's so many.
I do too.
Obviously, I loved All Fours by Miranda July, me and everyone else.
Mhm.
Um, I read Liars by Sarah Manguso. I thought that was I read those two books like right next to each other, and it was a
Oh,
very
yeah.
interesting experiment because they both entertain very similar themes about
Mm.
marriage and what is how to sustain a marriage over time, and
Wow.
um, they're
Yeah.
very different. They're very different, but
That's cool.
they're both really amazing. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
We're
those sound
we're
cool. I'm
lucky.
gonna have to check those out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, where
You're you're
let's
reading all the
see.
time.
So, well, I just finished Madwoman, as you know. So that I can just tell I'm gonna talk about that one forever. And also I recently read The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali.
Oh, okay.
It is similarly, it's harrowing. It's this like depiction of what it was like in Iran from the 1950s to the 1980s, where women went from pretty much having the same rights as the rest of the world to it like abruptly stopping in the 80s. So it's another one where it spans the friendship of these two women from the time they were like 8 until there's kind of like, you would almost call it an epilogue at the end. It does get into 2020, but you're mostly following them from like 8 to their like 30s or 40s basically. And it's really powerful. It's very heavy, so it's like if you're not in the mood for heavy, just don't start it. But when you're in the mood for it, it's really perfect for that. And then what did I just? Oh, I love spy thrillers. So I just finished the third Alias Emma book by Ava Glass. It's called The Trap. I just loved it so much. So
Amazing.
I love spy thrillers.
How much do you read a week, would you say?
um, it's really probably one and a half books
Yeah,
a week, and then it really depends because I my husband and I are freelancers together, so it also like depends on that. Sometimes it's like it is only one a week, but sometimes it's like I can kind of read one during the week and maybe part of one on the
yeah.
weekend. So yeah, I read a decent amount, but there are still bookstagrammers out there reading like 200 a year, and I'm like, I don't think I'm ever gonna get that.
How do they do it? It's amazing.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
I'm
Yeah,
impressed. I'm impressed with one a
yeah,
week, honestly. Like, I think
yeah.
that's my ideal pace too, but it sometimes it's not possible, of course.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't have kids, like, I just have to take care of my work and myself, so it makes it easier.
I love
I just have dogs that act like them sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, where can people follow you to stay up to date with everything?
Yeah, I'm at Chelsea Bieker, Chelseabieker on Instagram and all the other places. I have a website, www.chelseabieker.com, and I have information about my book tour. I'll be going to lots of stops, so I hope that listeners will come see me in person. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Well, I will put all those notes in or all those links in the show notes, and thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful, and it means so much to me to be read so closely and just to connect the
Yeah.
way that you connected with the book is so special. So I feel so lucky. Thank you.